This is me with my friend's parrot. It's not the kind of bird I study, but I think we get along pretty well. Though 5 minutes after this photo, he did bite me really hard. But it was my
fault. Your friend
fault.
or the parrot?
It's a good question. The parrot. But it was my fault because I tried to stop him from pulling out my hair. So that was really, shouldn't have done that. But when I tell people that I study birds, by far the most common response I get is, I hate birds.
Can we take a poll of the room? Give a round of applause if you hate birds.
That's an objectively weird response.
Round of applause if you love birds.
Okay, glad we have some bird lovers. Hopefully I can change your mind if you're not into birds.
Wait, Arnav, really? Is this like a diss track album towards birds that you have on the screen right now? Because that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Track 2, fuck roosters. Track
Fuck
3,
woodpeckers.
fuck pigeons. It's just all the birds.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that we interrupted you. Please go ahead.
But yeah, number one answer is I hate birds. But the second most common response, which is thankfully getting more traction, is, did you know that birds are dinosaurs? So I did know that. But actually, I think that's a really good question because for a long time, this was just kind of a fun fact for me, like it might be for a lot of you. But I remember the moment that it actually clicked for me that birds are really dinosaurs. And it was real like Plato's allegory, leaving the cave moment, but with pigeons. And I think this is going to be a little philosophical tangent here, but I feel like this is part of what got me into science, because when you're learning about the world as a kid, you learn about these categories. You know, we learn that these things over here are dogs, and these things are wolves, and these are two separate kinds of things. But the more you learn about biology and ecology and genetics, the more you kind of see that everything alive is kind of very unique. And even for all of us here, each of us here, the exact set of biological traits that makes up who you are has actually never before existed in the entire history of life and never will again.
Woo! I'm dying with my traits.
But somehow also equally true if you want to zoom out into the fourth dimension a little bit. Technically, everything alive is actually one of trillions of little fingers of this single four-dimensional creature that spans all of time from the beginning of life to, I guess, the end of it. Hopefully not for a long time. But I think that's really cool, and the more you learn about science, the more you're able to hold in your mind this somehow contradiction that everything is alike, and at the same time, everything is different. And I feel like that's really beautiful, and I love learning about the world in that way. But let's get back to the fun stuff, to dinosaurs. Let's put them in context a little bit. So dinosaurs are closely related to this other group. These are these extinct reptiles known as pterosaurs you might have heard of. They're often associated with dinosaurs, but they're not technically dinosaurs. They're very cool.
Too many elbows.
Yeah, they are very bony. But yeah, the closest really living relatives of dinosaurs are the crocodiles. That might have inspired my desire for crocodile hearts. And they're very cool.
Inspired by desire for crocodile parts is an incredible phrase.
But yeah, we can zoom out a little bit. We get to turtles, and then we round out the reptile family with the Lepidopsaurs, which is the fancy name for lizards and snakes, which are technically lizards, and the Tuatara, which is down there, which is not actually a lizard. So fun family. And just here's where we are mammals, just outside the reptile tree. These are bats. Big fan of bats. But yeah, so we can then zoom into the dinosaurs a little bit. Yeah, bats. But dinosaurs have these two major groupings, the ornithischians and the saurischians. And ornithischians are your big famous herbivorous plant-eating dinos like Triceratops and Stegosaurus and the duck-billed dinos. And then saurischians have this other major split. The first group is sauropods, the long-necked dinosaurs like Brontosaurus. Another little tangent here, but sauropods have crazy hands. No one's ever talking about the hands. I actually learned this way deep into my dinosaur Wikipedia page, but their hands are crazy. If you go to the Natural History Museum, you should check them out. But the other group are the theropods, and these are the rock star dinosaurs. You got T-Rex, Allosaurus, Spinosaurus, Velociraptor, and also all the birds. So this is the only surviving lineage of dinosaurs, the theropods. So that's the context of everything. So let's talk about birds. This is a bird. This is a zebra finch, which is the kind of bird I study. But I think it exhibits some birdie traits. But I don't know, we can maybe get from the other guests or from the audience, what are some traits you feel like make a bird a bird?
Feathers.
That's a good one.
Fly.
Hollow bones is a great one.
A beak.
Beaks. Eggs, yeah. Flying. They are very loud.
They're annoying. and they're not real.
Yeah, I think those are all really great answers. And actually, none of those things are unique to birds. And backwards hip, yes, that's very
Is that
niche.
true? They have a backwards hip?
Yeah, so I didn't talk about it much, but Ornithischia, that group of dinosaurs, Stegosaurus, Triceratops, means bird hip. Ornitho, like ornithology, and ischia is one of the hip bones. And in birds, that hip points backwards. And this is also true of the ornithischian dinosaurs. But if you remember that little thing from a while ago, birds are actually not bird hip dinosaurs. So their hips are also backwards, but
Wait.
independently.
So the bird-hipped dinosaurs did not evolve into birds.
They did not.
So they're not bird-hipped.
Right.
I guess so. But I
That's
feel like this
so
is
annoying.
Yeah, they're not bird-hipped dinosaurs. But yeah, I feel like we mentioned a whole bunch of cool birdie features. None of them are actually unique to birds, which is actually kind of cool. But let's talk about this great mention. You mentioned feathers. So feathers, I think, are probably one of the birdiest traits. No other animals alive have them. And you might have an idea in your head of what feathers look like, but they actually come in a whole variety of fancy shapes, and they're specialized for things like flight, for insulation, for contour, like making the bird aerodynamic when it flies. And this is from the Wikipedia page for feathers, and there's actually 100 million feather forms just for display because they look sexy.
I would love that puzzle.
Yeah, it probably is
Yeah.
a puzzle.
One or two people really agree with me.
This is too much puzzle talk, you guys. Come on, let's go ahead and move
Hey,
on.
puzzle heads, meet me at the after party. We're gonna have a lame time. All right, go on, Arnav.
No, yeah, but I think feathers are a very quintessentially birdie trait, which is what made this fossil really stand out when it was discovered in the 1860s. So you might be able to say here that this fossil has pretty clear evidence of feathers on its wings and on its tail, which is very birdie. But you might not be able to see depending on where you are, but it also has a long bony tail and a toothy mouth. So this is Archaeopteryx, and here's an artist's impression of what it might have looked like. And this was one of the first clues that birds and dinosaurs might have something to do with each other, because the bones are very dinosaur-y in the traditional sense that we think of them, but it has feathers. So Archaeopteryx is actually relatively closely related to modern birds, and Archaeopteryx and modern birds make up this group known as the avialans. And here are a bunch of avialans. So all of these animals are extinct. None of them are actually modern birds, but you can see they all basically look like birds. I think if any of them had lived to today, we would call them a bird. They got wings, they got feathers. Most of them, a lot of them can fly, except some of them have tails and teeth, maybe weird birds. But I think there's a whole bunch of animals that were basically birds that just didn't make it past the asteroid.
Must be nice.
But we can even go out further in the dinosaur family tree. So these are the dromaeosaurs. If you've seen Jurassic Park, these are what are known as the raptor dinosaurs. And second from the right there is actually Velociraptor. So these look a little more dinosaur-y, but they were still pretty clearly feathered animals. And we can tell because we have a lot of fossils that look kind of like Archaeopteryx, which have feathers directly preserved. But also in animals like Velociraptor and some others, we have what are called quill knobs. So in modern birds, like vultures that have very large wings, their feathers will actually attach to the bone, and you can see a little point where the feather attaches to the bone for extra support. And animals like Velociraptor, we can see that. So they had pretty substantial wings.
I also like how Gabriel has drawn them all heading towards this human
Yeah.
in a very threatening way.
Yeah.
And that one bird can levitate part of a branch. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
This is going to kill on the podcast.
Yeah, so these are kind of pretty birdy, but not birdy animals. They probably, for the most part, were too heavy to fly, but they likely used their wings for display. It actually always annoys me when someone says X feature is used for display, because that's kind of like the boring, basic answer. Anything can be a display. But the other thing they probably use them for is balance while hunting or when climbing. So a lot of modern birds will actually use their wings to balance while restraining prey or while climbing without flying. So these are things these animals probably use them for. So even further out in the dinosaur tree are the Scansoriopterygids, which I love saying. And these guys had these beautiful ribbon-like feathered tails. And I kind of did bury the lead here, though, because they have these two amazing representatives, which are Embopteryx and Yichi, that independently evolved these bat-like wings. So reptiles with bat-like wings, these are dragons. So dragons are real. But these are a very cool group of animals. But all of these are pretty tiny animals, maybe most of them bird-sized. Some of them maybe dog-sized, bear-sized. What about the heavy hitters? So here we have Eutyrannus huali. This guy was about 10 feet tall, 30 feet long, and this is the largest dinosaur that we have direct feather preservation for. And it was kind of covered in this fuzzy little coat, like a bear, which probably kept it warm because it lived in a pretty cold climate. And Eutyrannus huali, I think, means something like beautifully feathered tyrant. And you might have guessed from the name, but this guy is pretty closely related to Tyrannosaurus rex. So you might be wondering about the king. So we actually have skin impressions of Tyrannosaurus. They're pretty fragmentary, but they are all scaly. So it does seem like, sorry to disappoint featherheads, but Tyrannosaurus itself is probably mostly scaly, but it might have had some fuzz, light fuzz, especially as a juvenile, or some theories, kind of like elephants.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, elephants have fuzz?
Yes, elephants have fuzz.
Okay.
Noted.
And even whales, I think, have like little beards.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, most airless animals have a little bit of hair.
I'm sorry.
What? What did you say? She just... I have never, ever had a heckle like that. I said, whales have beards or whatever. She goes, have you checked yourself? I am shocked.
It works on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
Good heckle.
Well, anyway.
You can't come back from that.
No.
But yeah, that's T-Rex. This is me in my undergrad lab building where we had a mount of T-Rex. So I feel very closely bonded to this animal. When I was upset about life, I would go in the middle of the night and lie under the skeleton, and I feel like my problems were a lot smaller in 65 million years of history. But yeah, so we have pretty clear evidence of feathers throughout this theropod group of dinosaurs. But what was really cool is that a couple of years ago, we found the discovery of these two fossils. So here is Cullinodromaeus in color and Psittacosaurus in sketch. And Cullinodromaeus has this full coat of feathers, and Psittacosaurus has these bristles on its tail. And these guys are actually ornithischian dinosaurs, those bird-hipped dinosaurs. So they're on the complete other side of the family tree from birds and those other examples we looked at. So this kind of lends the idea that feathers might have just been ancestral to all dinosaurs, and the default for dinosaurs was to have feathers, and it was just lost in some of the larger or weirder groups. Kind of like mammals are by default hairy, and in things like elephants and rhinos or weird animals like hairless cats or humans, we've lost our hair.
Except for Noah.
Yeah.
So the one thing I noticed is like a lot of these prehistoric birds look familiar, and I kind of wonder, in your opinion, like, is that because we're just kind of like putting like our modern understanding of birds onto fossils and we're like representing them in artistic form, or like legit, like, did they actually look like birds we're familiar with?
I think there's probably both to that answer. So there is some artistic interpretation that always goes into drawing animals that are no longer around. But I think this is also very important that paleo-artists take a lot of time and are very knowledgeable in the different techniques. So we can actually pick up a lot of things about an animal with modern techniques from their fossils. We can tell from the bones where certain muscles were attaching, where fat was attaching. We have a lot of cool impressions of fossils with feathers like Archaeopteryx. And there's actually techniques where we can get color information from the fossil itself. So they probably did look a lot like modern birds. One more fun animal group, if you remember before, the pterosaurs. So these guys are outside the dinosaur family, but these also have a lot of evidence for these complex feather-like structures on their body that are called pycnofibers. But it is looking more and more likely that pycnofibers might actually just be another type of feather. So feathers aren't just like dinosaur things, they're a thing that a bunch of reptiles kind of had. So yeah, that was like a quick look at a bunch of fun photos, but hopefully you got a little taste of how feathers aren't really a bird thing at all. They're a dinosaur thing or a reptile thing, and birds have feathers because they are a type of dinosaur. So these are a bunch of birds I've seen.
Brag.
Mostly around New York City. This seagull in the middle was on the Hudson, and he had a lot to say to me. But yeah, hopefully the next time you see a bird, you can appreciate this funky little dino a little more.